Welcome, everybody. I'm Jennifer Goodman, the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance. Thanks for being here. The Preservation Alliance is really excited about this conversation and to be with you for this conversation, sort of book group inspired idea related to the great book, Communities and Consequences Too. I think we think in a state with great historic resources and a long tradition of both long timers as well as newcomers being connected to place and place-based efforts. I think we at the Preservation Alliance, and I know many of you, believe that we have real opportunities to dispel some myths and change some trends that relate to sort of this unbalance related to land use issues, demographics, and housing. Today, our goal is to generate some new ideas for you all to use in your communities and to collect some ideas that the Preservation Alliance can share with others. Really appreciate Plan New Hampshire, another statewide nonprofit in New Hampshire, serving as a program co-sponsor today. And it's wonderful to have the book's co-authors, Lorraine Merrill and Peter Francis, with us. And you all, you're the kind of group that makes things feel possible, I think, with your civic leadership and involvement in planning and preservation. Lorraine's going to kick things off with a short introduction and then lead us through a set of questions. Many of you know her. She wears many hats. A writer, a freelance writer and farmer, the former Commissioner of Agriculture, Markets and Food for the state, and a board member for the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance. Peter, it's great to have you here with us too. Demographer Peter Francis is a frequent and well-regarded speaker and writer on the subject of population and consumer trends. So with that, ready, go? Lorraine, I'm going to kick it over to you to sort of set the stage and get us going.
Okay, thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you all for being here today. I'm reminded that I first met Peter when I was writing on real estate trends in the state. I don't know how many decades ago now. I found an article somewhere that he had done on the prevalence of second home ownership in New Hampshire compared to other places and what some of the impacts could be. And then I discovered that this well-known demography expert lived in the next town to me. And so he invited me, instead of having a phone meeting interview, to meet him in person. And anyway, that's how our collaboration got started. And we dragged Jay Childs, who's a well-known local documentary filmmaker, into this eventually. And so this effort really started a good 15 years ago with our first book and film, which was a call to arms, if you will, a clarion call that we had these really troubling demographic trends in the state. And if we didn't start doing something about it, we were going to have some major impacts. Peter's got the original book there too. And that there are these myths out there that have made this all so much worse. That is to say, the imbalances in our population, generations, and our all the different levels of working people. That we need everybody. So now, really, the third part is to identify and highlight ways that we can turn this thing around, tip the scales back, and to go around the state, identify these people and communities that are doing things about it, and share that with others. So that's really what the film and the book both do as well. So
I'm going to share the screen now, Lorraine, if that's okay.
Yes. And I had a great opportunity. I was Commissioner of Agriculture for the state for 10 years. And one of the absolute best things about that job is you get to go all over the state. I really have had an opportunity to get to know people and places all around the state And it's such a wonderful, wonderful place with a lot of wonderful communities. And that's got brought into this book as well. So let's see, do we want to start with the self-introductions?
Let's do this intro first, if that's okay. Well, it's up to you.
Let's talk about the data.
Let's go to that first slide, Jennifer. Oh, we should thank Plan New Hampshire too today for sponsoring this as well as the preservation lines. Absolutely. Peter, here's Peter, our demographer, to tell us a little bit what is this problem we're talking about, Peter?
Well, the problem is that we didn't have a problem 30 years ago at all. New Hampshire looked like exactly like the rest of the United States. We had a demographic profile, an age profile that for all intents and purposes was identical to the rest of the country. We didn't have much in the way of diversity, but the age structure was the same as the country. That was 30 years ago. But during the past 30 years, more and more people began to believe stuff which was just not true. Now, we've had some experience nationally in the last few years of people who believe stuff, fervently believe stuff that is patently false and demonstrably false. So I don't feel so bad about what's happened in New Hampshire, but in each community, because of our tax structure, schools are paid for primarily through property taxes. And so it became more and more evident to people, or a belief within the voting population, that if we just keep the children out, we would lower our taxes.
Unknown caller.
And excuse me while I turn this off. I got to turn my phone down. We got into a situation where, because people believed that children are only a burden on our property taxes and not the future of our communities, they began taking zoning to the limit and only allowing age-restricted housing, that is restricted to people 55 and older, or just denying a building permit altogether. And this happened enough times so that in the past 30 years, our age profile has gone from being a perfectly average state, the same demography as the country, to being the second oldest state in the nation. Only Maine is older than New Hampshire, and we're catching up quite rapidly. The median age of New Hampshire is far above that of the rest of the country. And if you look at this chart, you can see that the reason for that is the explosion in the 55 and older population. The population.
Unknown caller.
Oh, for God's sakes. I got to figure a way to shut my phone off. The under 18 population, as you can see, is actually declined, and has declined a fair amount in New Hampshire, and continues to decline. And what people did not realize 20 years ago or 15 years ago is that those children that you're keeping out of your community are the workforce of tomorrow. And so now we have, massive workforce shortages because towns wouldn't allow the building of housing appropriate for families with kids. And I've been to a number of planning board meetings, and the attitude was so pervasive.
Unknown caller.
Excuse me while I.
Lorraine, did you have a follow-up regarding the chart? Not to cut Peter
Yes,
off, but
yes, thank you, Jennifer. Oh, so Peter, yes, and that imbalance of ages, we also have an imbalance that has developed where we've priced working people out of our communities. I mean, the headlines of the ever escalating average cost of a single family home or a condo in this state are, it's just been constant. And it's been made even worse by the pandemic. And also the pandemic has highlighted the shortage of what we call now essential workers. So what we have effectively done is we've invited in many more senior citizens from other places, frankly, to retire here, and many of whom are very well-to-do. And now they can't find the people to do the jobs, the service jobs for the services and support that they need. So that's the critical situation that we're in. And so where we're trying to move to is creating more warm and welcoming, inclusive communities. So more varieties of types of housing suitable for people at all age levels in the age cycle, and for all income levels, for all the different kinds of workers that we need to make our communities whole and working.
I want to add one point to what Lorraine just said, and that is this problem is occurring and continues to occur because of a belief within communities that whatever happens in Exeter, whatever happens in Stratham, where Lorraine lives, stays in Stratham and doesn't impact anything else. And so I've had people from, planning board chairs and so forth say, look, we don't want any affordable housing. It's only going to raise our property taxes. And by the way, if we build nothing but age-restricted housing, it has no impact on you. So get out of my town. I don't want to hear from you.
Yeah.
And so when each town believes that they are an entity unto themselves and have no impact on the rest of the state, that's what's causing this problem.
Yeah,
And
important theme.
that's another important theme of the book and the film. And Jennifer, maybe it's time to move to the next slide. We've highlighted the Upper Valley in both the film and the book for their attempts to work together, cooperate regionally to resolve some of these issues. And the workforce needs are just desperate there in the Upper Valley region. Dartmouth Hitchcock Health is a major supporter of this project. If you've got the book, you see the list of our sponsors. So that's I think what we want to look at is what does make a great community, and maybe that's a good lead in for everybody to give a brief self-introduction, and that would be name and your location, and a brief, as Jennifer said, what your connection is to preservation or to these other issues, and or what you think makes a great community.
I'm just going to show the images of Bradford, which is one of your profiles in the book, and we can talk a little bit more about the specifics. And up north, Lancaster, also profiled in the book, just to give you some great pictures before I'm going to close this just so we can see everybody. Is that okay?
We'll talk about some of those specifics later.
Great.
Yeah.
Here we go. So just an introduction, or an introduction plus what they think makes a great community? Just the introduction.
Who are you going to start with, Jennifer?
Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan Gross, and I live in Kensington. I am now the president of the Kensington Historical Society, the secretary of the Heritage Commission, and the newest Grange Hall trustee as of Tuesday. So I'm signing myself up for a lot of civic duties and really enjoying it. And I've only lived in Kensington for about 5 years, but we've made it our home, and I'm trying to make it a better place for everybody who lives here. So your book was like really enlightening and got me thinking. I can't wait to see how the future goes.
Good. Judith, you're on my screen next. I don't know. Do you just can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Judith Kushner. My husband and I live in Canaan, New Hampshire. Moved here about 30 plus years ago. I'm a member of Mascoma Valley Preservation. That's a regional preservation group with an aim toward economic development while preserving the places that make our towns unique or special. And old history in Canaan, as you were, Megan, when we first got here, got right involved, and also involved in an early Main Street group here, as well as a Plan New Hampshire charrette.
Oh,
many years ago. So,
neat, neat.
yeah.
Cooks?
I'm Tim Cook, and this is my wife, Lynn. And we live in Lyme, New Hampshire. We've been here for 42 years. And I've been on the planning board off and on since the 1980s. Actually, I was on the planning board when we wrote our zoning in 1989, which was adopted in 1989. And I'm also on the Heritage Commission in Lyme. And I did historic preservation for 16 years as a living, for a living. We restored a lot of houses and did some new houses, but and so, yeah, I've seen a lot changes in Lyme, certainly. Lyme is interesting because we're so close to Hanover and Dartmouth, and you know, our zoning is fairly strict, but it doesn't really restrict a lot of building. I mean, ADUs, we have, you know, there's a lot of ways people could do accessory dwelling units and all that. But I think the problem in Lyme is we just don't, the land is so expensive.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really difficult to build affordable housing.
Let's come back to that,
Yeah.
Tim, if you don't mind. Thanks. And Lynn had a whole career down the valley in the medical world.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So you know those essential worker issues, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Christina?
Yes, I remember to unmute. So Christina Astian in Moulton Borough, where I'm the chair of the Moulton Borough Heritage Commission and actually started it back in 2009. And also I'm one of the Lakes Region Planning Commission commissioners. So this will be the fourth time I've heard from Lorraine and Peter about this book, various iterations, starting in October 2020 with the Preservation Alliance, and then a special LRPC edition focusing on the Lakes region, where I think the pandemic has shown many of the issues we're talking about today in its worst form, with tremendous influx of people looking for real estate. And if there wasn't a problem before, there's a greater problem now where everyone is looking for workers and there's no affordable anything anywhere near us. So I'll stop with that.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Christina.
Althea, tell us where you're from and your hats you're wearing.
Our family lives in Concord, and I am just started helping the Preservation Alliance on special projects, including the gas holder. I'm a member of the Concord Heritage Commission. I'm on the board of the Pennacook Historical Society, and my husband is a city councilor, so we often have date night, you know, watching planning board meeting and things like that. So I'm really, really interested in the book.
Really involved. Yeah. Great.
Tiffany, the new executive director of Plan New Hampshire. Thanks for being with us.
Hi. Yes, thank you. And thanks for inviting us to co-sponsor this. Yes, as Jennifer noted, I'm the new director here at Plan New Hampshire. I've been on the job since September, so learning a lot, and was very grateful to have my predecessor Robin here for several months with me, helping me transition. I'm also a recent transplant to New Hampshire, so conversations like this and this book are just like really helpful for someone like me who's coming from a completely different region and trying to orient myself. Obviously, there's a lot of community issues across the country, you know, that are similar, but every place has all its unique dynamics. So I really appreciate you putting this forum together, Jennifer, and to the authors for putting this book together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nancy, are you ready to go next? And then Marcella, and then Cecilia?
Sure. Thanks. I just had to
Hi,
finish
Nancy.
a little lunch here, so I apologize. I went off air there. Hi, Lorraine.
Hi, Nancy.
Lorraine is my dear sister-in-law of many, many years. And I'm a native of Lebanon, but I've worked in Claremont for the last 17 years doing planning and economic development. So these issues are pretty important to us. We've had for the last 2 years, 0% vacancy in Sullivan County for rental housing.
Wow.
So it's pretty impactful.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, am I saying your name right?
Yes, yes. Thank you. I am currently in New Jersey. I am relocating to Exeter, New Hampshire. Probably get there about hopefully this summer. But I just completed a degree in historic preservation at the University of Vermont. So I'm very interested in preservation. Very new to it though, and I'm not even technically in New Hampshire yet, but I was intrigued when I saw that this, I do have the book. I was intrigued to hear people's comments about development in New Hampshire and preservation. So that's why I'm here.
Welcome.
Oh, it's great to have you coming to our state.
Thank you.
Cecilia? Am I saying your? And then Diane and Jameson, if you want to speak. Any one of you are welcome to jump in. Are you having muting problems?
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep.
This is Diane.
Hi, Diane.
I am a member of the actually secretary of the Moulton Borough Heritage Commission. And I am also on the board of the Eastern Lakes Region Housing Coalition. Before we moved here full-time, I was involved in affordable housing in Massachusetts. The last project I did was in Sudbury, Mass, where 25% of 37 townhomes were affordable in a housing in a town with unbelievably expensive housing, comparable to Moulton Borough, maybe even worse at this point. I think the median home price is around 900,000. I really am very hopeful that things are going to change and turn around. Moulton Borough is in a very unique position. It does not take advantage of its resources, its financial resources to work on housing. I feel as if I have been beating a dead horse the last few years. I'm hoping that things will change because it is becoming a dire situation as far as help is concerned here. And that's about it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Okay, is
Jameson?
that
I think, I don't know, I think we,
is that everybody?
I see 2 people unmuted, the last 2 unmuted, go for it.
So I'm Cecilia Azzi, and I actually work for Plan New Hampshire. I started working with Robin last April, and now I work with Tiffany. But part of my background, also, I worked in Exeter at Exeter Fine Crafts, so I recognize some of the people here. So it's a new direction, and I'm learning all of the time. And I'll say hello to Christina as well, because we had a chance to do a charrette at Castle in the Clouds, and that was wonderful. So hello, Christina, and thank you all for being here, because I'm happy to have this opportunity. So thank you.
Great.
All right, I don't know if Jameson is unmuted.
Hi, I'm here.
Good.
There we go.
Hi, I'm Jameson Tucker. I am in Rye, New Hampshire. I'm a transplant from Texas, and my mom has ingrained. She's a preservationist and has ingrained it in my brother and I. The difference is my brother likes to write about it, and I like to get in there and do it. So I moved up here with my better half in 2019, and I started a home repair company after, and I hope to eventually be full-time into preservation work. I do quite a bit of work on older homes. A lot of my clients are in Portsmouth, Exeter, Rye, what have you. But the charm, the people are very similar in Texas, but the rules are very different up here. We have a lot more consumer protection when it comes to real estate down in Texas, surprisingly, than we do up here. A lot more code enforcement down there compared to here. So there's that piece. But I early in my career, I worked in economic development and outside of Kansas City, and did downtown preservation work, boosting, diversifying the tax base, bringing property taxes down, and boosting education funding. So I too am out of my comfort zone and want to learn, continue to learn. Town hall, the town warrant thing blows my mind. We just had one here in Rye, and I can't believe I had to approve an expenditure on a fire truck. So it's just a real pleasure. I love the Alliance. I've really enjoyed your resources. So I watched your program on this book last night on New Hampshire PBS, and just so excited to be here. So thank you for your time.
So what a great group, Jennifer. That's the kind of resources we have in our communities. That's part of what makes us great. So a couple of you wants to jump in on, what are the essential qualities of a great community? What really makes a kind of thriving place where you want to live? Somebody just unmute. We're not that big a group. Just go ahead and unmute and jump in.
I would say a walkable town, like a nice town center, and also access to transportation corridors. That's one thing that attracted us to Exeter, was that you've got Amtrak going right through it. It's not too far from the highway, but not too noisy either. You want, for me, a lot of road noise is not good, but just a really nice walkable.
Great walkable town.
Yeah.
Yes, good point.
Close
Who
to
else?
the beach too, which is nice.
Yeah. Amenities, nature amenities. Yeah. Who else wants to jump in with what makes a really great community?
For me, I'm coming from a little bit of a different community. I live in the town next to Exeter, but we are still very rural, and we don't have anywhere we can walk. I can walk to the town park, but that's about it. And not many people can. But for me, it's about the community connections and the connections with the people who live here. I really like when I drive down the road and I see my neighbors walking, and I stop and I can say hello, and at the library run into people that I know. And I think one thing about living in New Hampshire has highlighted just how important your connections with your neighbors and your friends are.
Yes. Thank you, Megan. Anybody else want to jump in with?
Well, probably, Lorraine, the obvious one of diversity of age groups, I would think.
Yep.
And why is that, do you think? Why does that make such a difference? I happen to agree with you, but.
Well, it just makes a vibrant town. I think a lot, like in Lyme here, the school is really kind of the center of the town in a way. All the kids in the school. So we have, yeah. Even though we do have a large aging population, like most towns, but.
Yep. No, that's
the kids.
Well, okay. So right there, you've all raised some of the key points, and for those of you who have looked at the book or the film, are there examples that you would point to, from the towns, the stories that were featured in either the book or the film, which they don't completely, they're not carbon copies of each other. There's overlap, but they're not the same. That are inspiring, where those kinds of communities are happening, where people are working to create them.
Judith, not to put you on the spot, but did you want to say something before that relates to that question?
I was just going to double up on great libraries. I mean, in Canaan, many of us feel that that's our town center. Just it's downtown, and it's a great library.
And all ages like the library too, right?
Yes,
right.
Music. Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
I love the youth piece in the Lancaster example. I talk about that a lot with people, that decision to put 2 high school students on the planning board to both get their perspectives on what the town should look like and be, but also to engage them and in that hope of, having kids come back or having kids stay and feel really connected to their communities.
Yes, yes, thank you, Jennifer. And another example from Lancaster was when they were doing their the master planning for their downtown, which has been such a success and involves so much preservation work. They took the group input sessions to the high school to speak directly with the young people, and to the senior center to get input from the older members of the community that might not have gotten out to go to a meeting at night, that kind of thing. Really making efforts to involve all ages. I think that's great.
And we're in a town that has no zoning, but I was really interested in the form-based code.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have different
Yes.
challenges.
And what now? So Judith, what appealed to you about the form-based code?
I guess I'd just like to learn more about it, really.
Yeah.
Dig
Yeah,
into.
Concord is using that in a major way. And in my town of Stratham, we have used it for certain district, not the whole town yet, but that's where, for those of you who haven't read about it yet, it's a zoning, more recent zoning technique that relies on developing what people want the area to look like, feel like, rather than necessarily regulating the uses so much. And it works especially well for multiple use zoning and so forth, which has made such a difference. The downtowns that work are the downtowns that have housing, so that you have people living there. It brings life. Lancaster, again, is a great example. A local businessman, retired engineer named Greg Cloutier, has invested in restoring and reusing several now historic buildings in Lancaster. And he says it's the apartments on the higher levels that make the whole things work, because it's when business prospects see the people in the downtown in the evening or any time, people coming and going because they live there, they see potential for business. And so it all relates. Nancy, you've got some examples of that too, don't you?
Yeah, Claremont has, I think we've got 150 new units of housing. 30 of that is transition housing in 3 different buildings and 3 different adaptive reuse projects. And they're all interesting because one is market rate, Eric Timberg, who everybody knows from Newmarket and the coast. Another has low income housing tax credits in it. It's a mixed income building. And the third is transition housing for people coming out of the house of correction who've gone through their drug and alcohol program. But it's 3 buildings that are once been vacant for 70 years.
Wow.
And really transforming the whole downtown. They're within 2 blocks of each other.
Yeah.
So it's been kind of fun to watch.
Yes.
I think I love your quote too, Lorraine, because I don't expect to hear that as much in the village, in the small town setting as I do in the bigger towns and small cities. So just that importance of housing with all scale municipalities, more urban and more rural, just to give that liveliness is just a really important takeaway, I think.
Right.
In addition to it being needed, but just in terms of where it's located.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, it can be a village center instead of a downtown,
Yeah.
as far as that's our
Call that
community
the
still.
downtown.
Yeah.
And I think Judith's point just reminds me of different kinds of overlay districts that are out there, including some that are voluntary, where you can really do some kind of ground up planning with the community. And I think part of form-based zone is really presenting it in a way that people can see and understand. It's a more visual document, more engaging for people that are making decisions within that district. So that whole question of what tools fit in what communities, I just wanted to
Yes.
reconnect us to those overlay districts that are different kinds of zoning, and there's even a Lakes region example where it's voluntary, not regulatory.
So I had a question, and I don't know if it's something that you and Peter saw when you were working on the books, but whenever I've been involved in a master plan process in either of two communities, everybody talks about the quality of life. Quality of life is kind of everywhere. And when you ask people to define what that is, they always start talking about things the way they are. Things the way they are. They want to see the landscape. They know they don't want change. And I think it right from the gate sort of puts you at a, you know, in the crosshairs of this whole developing new housing issue. When you build new houses, it changes the landscape.
It does, doesn't it? And I think, you know, Nancy, you raise a really, really key, because this is one of the points of conflict involved in this whole thing. And I think all of us can empathize with both points of view. I see it, you know, as we wrote in the book about the surveys that have been done by Stay Work Play, which is the nonprofit that's tasked with encouraging more younger people to come to New Hampshire or to stay in New Hampshire, as well as ARP New Hampshire, who of course is representing those of us in the 50 and up group. There's so much commonality in what both age groups are looking for in their communities and places to live. And I think what comes strongly through it is that sense of place. And people can often perceive that then as the way things are now, and if anything changes, it will no longer be that way. I think if we can try and focus on the positive aspects, what about that sense of place are people cherishing and wanting to keep? And it's often, it's the character, it's the local character they don't want to change. And that can involve natural resources, landscape. It can involve the built environment as it is now. What is it that they like about it? It kind of gets to the form-based code, which is what they do. It's like, you know, so what do you like about this place?
Yeah.
That's what we want to make sure we keep, or that we make sure that new construction is in keeping with that. And I think that's somehow, if we can keep our conversations focused on the positives that come, and the fact, well, sometimes we do have to have trade-offs, because, you know, we do need people to answer the call when we call the ambulance. We do need people to teach in our schools and provide nursing assistance in our nursing homes and assisted living facilities and so forth. So, but anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I'd like to add one thing to what you just said, Lorraine, and that is that most people, most adults above the age of, say, 40, have in their minds a suburban landscape of single-family dwellings on pretty large lots. And most of the zoning in New Hampshire towns is a 1 acre or 2 acre zoning, which of course is terribly destructive to the natural environment. And many times—
Bigger than 2 acres.
2 acres. And many of the conversations I've had over the last 15 years or so with the two books with people indicate that they think it's great, but in fact, the preservation folks like yourself say, well, could we not have cluster housing where the houses are clustered closer together and leave the rest of it in open space? And the answer to that in too many towns is, well, how about we just forget the housing and have it all open space? And that has happened in Newfields and a number of other places, where the belief was that if we can just preserve the landscape without any housing on it at all, and keep those kids out of school will pay for it in lower property taxes.
That's true, Peter, isn't it? And people, that's one of the myths that we try to bust in the book is that people are convinced that large lot size zoning is how you preserve rural character, and it's the exact opposite. It's how you ruin rural character and create suburbia. So there's lots of work we still have to do on these the myth bustings. What other changes do you think we need? All of you participating here today, what changes do you think are needed to create more housing and more importantly, more variety of housing types that are going to be suitable and desirable to folks from all different ages and income levels and so forth?
Well, can I ask a question as well as offer a response? This is, I've lived in different regions of the country, and I've never lived in an area, I know it's very New England, for the average citizen to have input on the way money is spent in the town. I've always, even in tiny towns, we were always driven by the city manager and the city council. So those types of decisions weren't left to the average person because we paid them to make those and discern that decision for me. Now, is that type of governance considered like a third rail here in New England or New Hampshire to allow like your elected leaders as well as maybe a budget committee to make these types of decisions for zoning or what have you? So that way they can, because they're training, they're getting degrees in planning, they're getting degrees. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. And you know, Jameson, there are communities in New Hampshire that have that kind of government. Each community can decide, you know, so it tends to be larger ones will have town council or city council government, but there can be smaller communities that choose to go that way. And a lot of our communities, we find we get at a stage where it really does become too cumbersome and too hard to keep people educated enough on the issues that it stops working. But making that jump to a town council or city council is not an easy hurdle to make. But
and then there's the whole issue of land use boards and heritage commissions, et cetera. I mean, Tim or other people, do you have positive examples to give about sort of how you've kept up with things or tried to debunk the myths and keep your role leading to healthier communities?
I have found here that there's a gap between planning and building codes. So, you know, our ordinance might allow you to convert a single family into 3 units, but once you go from 2 to 3 in New Hampshire, you're sprinkling the whole building. And we've had the same issue sort of come up in discussions with strong towns, you know, phasing. It runs into conflict, maybe more with fire codes than building codes, but often with both. So some things that our zoning would allow end up being so expensive that they don't get done. And that's sort of those smaller projects and the middle housing that everybody talks about.
Yeah.
In our small and considered poor community or poor town, just getting a good designer, a good builder, a good developer who pays attention to design and landscape, just getting them out here is an issue. Although there's some great examples close by, you know, which we can turn to and show, you know, that this could work here as well. That's an issue here.
That's a good point. Yeah, yeah.
Well, having you know, good builders and professionals at all levels is it's a challenge, having enough to get all the work done.
Right, but also having them engage with a community such as Canaan, I think,
right,
is varied, but getting them out here to invest is another matter.
From my statewide perspective, I feel like I've seen a change in the last 2 to 5 years in terms of funders like CDFA embracing smaller projects or more non-traditional projects. I'm hopeful that programs like the Land and Community Heritage Investment Program will sort of in its next generation think more about properties and projects that have housing as part of them, or other, public policy goals that relate to this conversation. So I'm feeling good about that, that those major funders are intersecting with these issues in practical ways like that. Smaller projects, mixed use projects, trying to help the housing situation in other ways.
Well,
I was
let's
going to
just
ask,
say-
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask if there's any sort of investigation into adaptive reuse. We studied that quite extensively at UVM, where someone comes in and renovates something that's already standing for use, and there's tax credits you can use for that as well.
Exactly.
This is Peter Francis here. I want to add a point that you just made, and that is a fellow who lives in Exeter, actually, very close by. His name is Eric Chinberg, and he has rehabilitated many downtowns, particularly Newmarket, where he takes old mill buildings and converts them, into housing, very affordable housing, and they fill up instantly. So that if more of what Mr. Chinberg has been doing can be replicated with historic buildings in other communities, in Exeter, the area that he's rehabilitated here, the mill buildings, as well as the mill buildings, old mill buildings in Newmarket, they're within very, very short walking distances of the downtown. And so everybody doesn't need 2 cars. And you don't have the traffic, which is the bugaboo of people that object to new housing. Oh my God, the traffic. And that's all they can talk about. Whereas if you build downtown, even if you can't rehabilitate an older building, then build something newer, there's no traffic except for foot traffic. So it can be done, and it is being done. It's just that my experience is that people are afraid of density. The minute you indicate that you want to build something of higher density of housing, they're in horror. All they can think of is Boston or someplace near Boston.
With horrible parking and traffic problems.
Sometimes the adaptive reuse kinds of denser housing, though, Peter, I think are more easily accepted by people than creating new construction because of that change factor.
Right.
And
Nancy,
as
I think, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, Nancy had said that Eric Chinberg's got a project in Claremont now as well. So I mean, he's gone all the way across the state. And there are others that are picked up this kind of adaptive reuse of historic
Yeah, I guess
buildings.
I wanted to mention the others. I feel like, Nancy, I bet your operation has been welcoming kind of novice developers, not the Chinbergs of the world, but the person doing their own project for the first time. And, small scale compared to what we were just talking about, but can have a huge impact, a huge catalytic impact, and kind of relates to what Judith was saying about, or asking the question of how do you attract and support people that might not come to your town otherwise. So using the networks and being welcoming, sort of back to the welcoming point of the book, try to move some of these projects along.
Just had another quick question, maybe, and the impact of this, all of the demographic changes on historic districts. We do have an historic district in Canaan. There's quite a fuss about the potential of having Airbnb there.
Oh.
It can sometimes be a way for people to preserve a building until they can, live there themselves. So anyway.
It's one of those double-edged swords.
Who
I
are
can
those
say
dogs?
that as as a younger person on many of my town boards and committees, I see a lot of pushback from the older members against adaptive reuse and about any change whatsoever. And I think in most towns that could be a detriment if you're not open to something that's new and it's going to attract people to your town, or a change of use for a building that might add 5 more parking spots because of the traffic issue. And I live in a very small town, so it's a little different than a place like Newmarket or Exeter, but it's very frustrating for me as a young person who's more, I feel like, open to change. And I'm also not from here, so that adds a little bit to the pot. But it's very frustrating to be working in this field and trying to get people thinking differently when they are not open to thinking differently.
And a great example of the younger demographic, yes, being open to change and seeking it, but also very much interested in and committed to preservation. And I mean, look at what you're doing in the community already, Megan. And I think a lot of this is education and you know, talking, communication, putting people's minds at ease. I mean, we had controversy in our own town over our old town hall, which the town had voted years ago to sell because they were seeing as a white elephant and they didn't want to own it anymore. And then it, you know, got used commercially, and attitudes changed over a couple decades or so. And people really wanted to then preserve it. And yet it was not controlled by the town anymore. But, you know, it ended up with a adaptive reuse with a easement, historic preservation easement on it, working with the Alliance as well as our Town Heritage Commission. And I think a pretty positive outcome, and it's got mixed level income housing in it now. And it's, so I think, you know, we need to understand what you're saying. I know it's a problem, but we have to keep talking to people, and so many cases like that, you're sharing the same basic values, but having, you know, just not, it's that vision thing.
Yeah.
Whether you can envision a positive outcome.
I'm thinking of great
Images
communications that Lime, don't you have, we only have a couple minutes left. I should say that to you, Lorraine, and say that to the group. The kind of welcome wagon concept you have in Lime for new residents.
Yeah.
I know Christina's done great things with signage, right? And also a recent rack card handout. Am I remembering that right? And I'm thinking of the project, Judith, you're doing with the center meeting house, and just having these incredible visuals, you know, the while you're restoring the windows and they're out, you had those great patchwork quilt.
That's in Grafton, the Grafton Center meeting house.
Yeah. Just, anyways, I think you all are doing cool things to be welcoming. Tim, did you want to say something?
Well, I wanted to say something about codes. Sort of an aside, but I think sometimes building codes are really restrictive in the sense of trying to preserve an historic building. An example is that we have a builder in Lyme who had bought a 1805 house on the Common, which is really great, and it had an L, and there were 4 apartments in it, and he wanted to redo it to make 4 senior housing units. And because he was doing more than 2, it put him in another code level, and he could not do it. He had to tear down the back of the whole half of the building and put 2 units in the front half, and then build a whole new building 30 feet away in the back. Because the codes were ridiculous. I mean, he had to replace all the rafters. He had to, anyway, it was just really a shame. And I think that's a real detriment to actually preserving historic buildings, where you really essentially can't put more than 2 units.
Yeah, Nancy's point too. Yeah.
So I think we're making progress though. And I think that this pandemic situation that we were in, I mean, if you just read the headlines in all of our papers, the awareness and concerns about affordable housing, about the workforce shortages, people are starting to wake up. And I think what we really need to do is, what can we do to gain momentum, to make things happen faster and make sure we are a welcoming and inclusive state.
So I think we can compile some of the ideas that we heard today and add a few more and send them back around, and feel free to add to them and know that they'll get sent on to other people who have your kinds of roles, who are also working to make a difference in your communities. Lorraine, did you want to say anything else before we close? I'll make sure folks have the link to the film that's coming up soon.
Yes, yes, and the film will be shown on New Hampshire PBS 2 weeks from today in the evening, 8 o'clock, and you can see it online as well. And I want to thank everybody here who's participated. It's a fabulous group. It is exactly the kind of people that make you have hope for the future of this state, you know.
Agreed, agreed.
Thank you, Lorraine. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter,
Thank
and
you.
everybody. We'll close with that. I'll send a follow-up with some invitation to support our work further, come to other events, and give us some feedback on this and other programs. But keep taking your vitamins. Thanks for all you're doing, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks.